Rev up your engines! Today I'm going to talk about Chinese knockoff cars. And are they coming to a store near you anytime soon? Now, to understand Chinese knockoff cars that are visual copies of famous cars like Jeeps, you have to understand a little bit about the Asian copying scenario overall. Now, the first big copiers in Asia were actually the Japanese. And they aren't like these modern Chinese knockoffs. They didn't make things that look like the other vehicles. They made things that were the other vehicles. As an example, in the 1960s, I was always into motorcycles, went to a motorcycle show, a 650 BSA, British motorcycle, right? And it had won the best motorcycle in the show. But the guy that brought it in had a wicked sense of humor. It was actually a 650 Kawasaki, which Kawasaki had made so exact to the 650 BSA that it won the award for best British motorcycle in the show, even though it was a Japanese motorcycle. Nuts, bolts, everything were exactly the same, interchangeable and fit. It was such a good copy that it fooled the judges who thought it was a British motorcycle. Well, you might say, well, they're copying British motorcycles. Maybe not such a wise move. Well, they went far beyond that with their own engineers. This was just to get them off the ground floor so they could start selling motorcycles. Now, we go to modern day Chinese knockoff cars. They're made to look like the original cars that they're making a knockoff of, but they definitely are not copies. For example, in the past, a Chinese company called Geely, G-E-E-L-Y, they made the Geely GE, which looks quite a bit like a Rolls Royce. The Geely GE went for 30,000 pounds. So while that was only 30,000 pounds, the Rolls Royce it was copying, that was a 250,000 pound car. And you really couldn't compare the two when it comes to how they run and drive and their speed. But that isn't really the point. The Chinese were making something that looked the same, not that drove the same, and cost so much less that they can sell them that, look, it looks like a Rolls Royce, but hey, it's so much cheaper. And you might wonder, how can they get away with doing this? Well, there really are no international laws on how things look. There's a real thin line there to prove what some artistic idea came from. Hence, the Chinese make a bunch of these knockoff vehicles and sell them. Now, they don't sell them in the United States yet. They don't sell them in Canada yet. They're talking about moving into Canada, though. But they do sell some of them down the road here in Mexico. A company called Bayek, Chinese company, makes what they call the BJ40. It is an obvious ripoff of the Jeep Wrangler. But strangely enough, the last time I checked the prices, you could buy the Jeep Wrangler in Mexico for only about $1,000 more than this Chinese knockoff. Now, the Mexican market is much smaller than the American market, and I doubt that they would ever bring that fake Jeep into the United States. I'm sure that Chrysler Fiat would sue the heck out of them doing so. Well, the Chinese actually make an insane luxury vehicle that their premier and all the bigwigs drive around. It's called the Hunky L5, and they cost $760,000. So, they're much more than the Rolls Royce. It's a very limited production run. The Chinese are now having more pride in some of their stuff, so they're making their own ultra luxury vehicle that costs a lot more than a Rolls Royce. But going back to the cheaper knockoffs, the Chinese made a thing called the Land Wind. That was a direct copycat of the Range Rover. But while the Range Rover started at 40,000 pounds, this Chinese knockoff was 14,000 pounds. They never sold in the United States, they sold them in England. Cheaper price of the Chinese knockoff. And you can tell by looking at them, they look pretty much the same. They're nowhere near as fast as the cars that cost so much more money, but they look the same. The British sued them and won in court, and the Chinese had to take that off the market and not sell them anymore. But ironically enough here, the Chinese has just taken over and bought them. Tata, the Indian company, bought Jaguar and Land Rover, but now they got a venture with the Chery Motors in China, which is 50-50. They own half of the Land Rover, and the Tata owns half of the Land Rover. So the Chinese just, I guess they got even by buying half of the company. Now the next copycat vehicle is the Lifan 330. It's a direct copycat of the Mini. They're very expensive parts, and they're getting higher in cost. Originally they're relatively cheap, but now they're getting pretty expensive. So the Chinese have a little knockoff. They started copying the Minis in 2008, and then when the Minis facelifted in 2013, so did the Chinese. They facelifted their 330 to make it look even more like the new Mini. But so far they only sell them in countries that have lax enforcements like Peru and Russia. I doubt if they'll ever sell those things in the United States. Now the next copycat is the BYD company in China. They make the BYD S7, which is a direct copy of a Lexus RX. But at least it's not a copy of the new one. It's a copy of the 2008 version. Chinese Copycat has a turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. They look like them. The insides, no. Engines, transmissions, all that stuff's completely different. But they look the same. Now, there's so many car manufacturers in China now, it's not a surprise that some of them have just copied other people's design. As far as I can see, the Chinese are designing their own stuff. They're gonna sell to the public. We'll probably start selling in the United States at some point in time. There's market forces here, and they're not really copying anybody there, because if they're going to sell internationally, they're going to realize that they can't do that, or they're going to get in trouble with the lawyers. I mean, take their venture with Tesla. They're going to have the Model 3s rolling out from China. I guarantee you they're going to be selling those things in the United States at some point in time. I mean, really, why would the Chinese now be making copycat Range Rovers when they're making the real thing in China now? And if you go back far enough in time, when I was young, everybody talked about Japanese stuff. No one wants to buy that Jap crap that's out there. It's just garbage. Well, the Japanese just kept making them better and better and better. And now look, people look at Lexus as a real quality vehicle. I can certainly see the same thing happening in China over time. They got new automated factories, state of the art. They can build fancier things than other countries because they don't have a bunch of old worn out factories. They can build them from scratch. And they won't have to tarnish their image by making copycats of certain cars because they know, well, those are popular. We'll make something that looks just like it and we'll sell them. Because really the copycat stuff, that's kind of a drop in the bucket, really. I read one company, they're hoping to sell 10,000 a year of these copycat ones in Mexico. You know, a very small number of cars. Because really, if they get big enough, people would start suing them. It's just obvious. You know, you're not going to sue the small guy. He's not even bothering you. But when he gets bigger, then they'll get him for all kinds of patent copyrights. They're going to be making Jaguar SUVs in China. The Range Rovers are going to be made in China. They be cutting their own throats, willy-nilly copying everybody else out there when they're making the real thing themselves. Sure, there's always that tempting bit to copy somebody. I got a customer that's got a fake Gucci bag that's made in China that she showed me. She put it next to her friend's that was a real one. And you couldn't tell the difference. The stitching was exactly the same. But it's going to get to a point where the Chinese are going to be a high enough level themselves that they don't want to be copying other people's stuff because they'll make their own and they'll stand on their own. So as far as I'm concerned, these copycat stuff, it's just a stopgap for some companies to try to make some money quick. You can put sheet metal on anything and make anything look like something else if you really want to. Take my 94 Celica. It's really a Toyota Corolla. It's got the same engine, the same transmission, the same brakes. The only thing is, it's on a snazzier looking body. So people like them. It's not really a sports car, it's a Toyota Corolla. It can run forever. But it's not a sports car. And really, if you look at designs, the way they're going in cars anyways, they all pretty much look the same. The other day I saw a Mercedes that looked like my wife's Matrix, that looked like a Ford Escape, I mean, they're all looking almost exactly the same these days. With aerodynamic forces and making them smaller with 4-cylinder engines. They really don't look all that different anymore. But at least now you know a little more about the history of these Chinese knockoffs. And although I've never personally driven one because they didn't bring them in the United States, they were certainly afraid of being sued there. People I know down in Mexico, they say, hey, they're okay cars, you know, cost less, we're happy with them. I find it quite humorous. I can't wait to see what the future comes of it. Two ex-English companies, MG, Morris Garages, Jaguar, they're both being made in China now by Chinese companies. And the MG, they gave up with the sports car idea and they're making little SUVs. Well, Jaguar's making little SUVs too in China, just like MG is making them in China. The MGs are going to be like $18,000, while the Jags are starting at like $35,000. So if they're both made in China and they both have English names on them, I can't wait to see if one or the other or any of them are successful in the actual market. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.